I don't think you can say how to run a community centre 101, paint the walls blue, put a red couch in there, have 4BH on and you're off and running. I mean, there are some very good elements to running a community centre, but something works in here.
Whoa, hey, hey, ooh, Soleil.
Before the flood, there wasn't a Yeronga Community Centre. From the flood and from the disaster that happened in our community, something magnificent has happened. I see the community centre rising out of the flood. It's sort of like the phoenix that rises out of the ashes, and it's something beautiful that arises.
Look, I think once you've lived through a natural disaster, your life can never be the same again. I'm proud of my community because we've bounced back, and the amount of support and love and loyalty that followed that flood was quite something.
If it wasn't for the Yeronga Flood Recovery Centre, I think Norm and I have often said we probably would have gone mad because there was no respite or relief during those first 6 and 12 months, yes.
If it wasn't for the Yeronga Flood Recovery Centre, there wouldn't be the Yeronga Community Centre, and I think that would be a great shame.
Even though we never had a place in the beginning, we had to struggle for money, we had to find a new place, we had to renovate Killarney Street. Out of all those things, our community is better and stronger and more equipped to deal with things in the future.
I'm proud of my community because there are so many good people out there.
If it wasn't for the Yeronga Recovery Centre, I wouldn't have found out that there are people with golden hearts in the world.
Once they walked through that door and realised that there was all these other ways that people could help, I think that created hope and gave light to a lot of people.
If it wasn't for the Yeronga Flood Recovery Centre, I can't say I could have done it on my own. And I think my kids are better for it.
It was interesting when you saw what the centre gave to them at that stage, whether it be just pure respite from looking at their muddy walls, whether it be access to items, access to the government services in the hall, or just access to people who knew exactly where they were. It was great. My name is Fiona McLeod. I'm one of the community development workers at Yeronga Community Centre, and I have been involved with the centre since its creation, and prior to that I was one of the coordinators of Yeronga Flood Recovery Centre.
I'm Melinda McIntyre and I am one of the coordinators of Yeronga Community Centre, one of the community development workers here. The Yeronga Community Centre came out of the Yeronga Flood Recovery Centre, which was established during the floods of 2011, January 2011.
Now, Marion, I'm actually going to start with the question, could you please share with us your story of January 2011?
Well, it actually started before January 2011 because we were on holidays in December down northern New South Wales, and having been through the 1974 flood, we kind of knew the signals, and Norm, my husband, kept saying, I wish they would let that dam go because with the wet weather that's coming, we're probably going to get another flood. So when we came home the first week of January, we were kind of mentally prepared for it. So 2 or 3 days before that, I started to take pictures of everything and packed up everything that was of value, pictures, computer, family records. And I rang our son-in-law and said, can you come and get it? And he said, why? And I said, well, I think we're going to get flooded. And sure enough, the following day we were flooded.
Here's how the rest of the world has watched this tragedy unfold. Catastrophic flooding is turning Australia's third largest city of 2 million people into a ghost town.
Northeast Australia is reeling from a deepening tragedy as torrents of water engulf Queensland.
Australia, meanwhile, faces years of rebuilding after historic flooding there, and now a cyclone threatens to bring even more rain.
Rushing floodwaters almost 15 feet high swept up this outdoor tented bar, smashing it into a bridge.
Yet another wave of deadly flooding and torrential rains are slamming northeastern Australia.
An estimated 35,000 homes have been affected by the flooding, some 30 of Brisbane's suburbs underwater.
Stranded horses are struggling through muddy waters in a desperate search for higher ground.
And officials are now describing a rebuilding effort of, quote, post-war proportions.
So we're recording this in what, November 2013. So the time period of recovery for the floodies is huge. And I think the time period for the volunteers who donated initially, I think they can't quite fathom that it's still going and it's still happening. I mean, we are the Yeronga Community Centre now, but we still would generally be broken up to a third floodies, a third people from supported housing, and a third general community members. So I think there will always be a component of flood and floodies in Yeronga Community Centre. It's where we came from. It's what brought us all together. Morning, Andy.
Good morning.
How are you today, dear boy?
Well.
Thank you.
How am I today? I'm well.
What do you put in this stuff? I was all right until I came here and had some of this.
Right, go.
Camera on and
Selwyn, we've started. This is
We've
it,
started
darling.
it.
Yes, go.
Okay, yeah, my name is Selwyn Russell and I live in Brisbane Corso and it was underwater.
Selwyn, I'm going to say some sentences, the beginning of them. This is not a psychoanalysis test. I'd like you to repeat the beginning and put in your own ending, please.
Oh.
Is that okay?
I don't know, what's the sentence?
The first sentence is, I'll never forget the moment when.
Oh, okay, I'll never forget the moment when I walked up the side and turned around the steps and saw the cat was safe there above the water, the mud hadn't gone up to him and he was... Yeah, that was...
pretty special.
The flood washed away
my bees.
But it also brought...
My bees back.
The flood washed away, the flood washed away my house, my book collection. The flood washed away my whole lifetime's collection of novels.
And the flood washed away my passport. I'm kind of goosed here at the moment in this country.
Oh, we might need to do something about that, sweet pea.
The flood washed away my son's preschool book.
But it also brought...
but it also brought tears and new friendships.
I guess the flood washed away my lifestyle. I think that's probably the most profound thing that happened. It washed away our lifestyle, yes.
But it also brought...
an awareness that how lucky we are to be living in the community that we're living in. You know, I think that's... And we're grateful for that, yes.
An experience like the January 2011 flood for me has been an amazing gift. I haven't been a victim of it. I've flourished, struggled, but flourished and grown from it. So I haven't been a victim to circumstance. Therefore, I love the term floody. I think it's a great term, and big up you for coming up with that one.
We're not victims, we are floodies because we've had a shared experience, yes. But I do think we've endured, yes. And it's probably part of being human that you go through this roller coaster of feeling very down, and then you cope, and then you're down and cope. And that's sort of how you get to the end of it, don't you?
I found some fear today. Usually I never mind. I need to shake away some peace I try to find. All these thoughts, they take my time. I'm leaning on the other side. I know what's wrong.
At that stage, the water was just down at the bottom of the road, and during the day that we started to move things out, it started to creep up. And one of the things that I had been doing when we came back from holidays was to go online and look at the Moggill and Mount Crosby river levels, which were a very good indicator of whether we were going to get flooded. And I kept that computer on all the time to keep checking. And as I could see the levels were rising, we knew that, you know, it was a certainty.
Just swept its way down that range into towns.
I believe at that time the Lockyer Valley tragedies were unfolding. So I got on the net and I found out there was a flood warning for Brisbane River, and I phoned the council, which had and still has a service where they're able to predict the flood depth on your particular block of land. At that stage it was 0.8 of a metre predicted flood level, so I started moving some stuff upstairs.
My name's Noel Dean, and we lived at 77 Inskip Street, Rocklea. My gorgeous wife, who will tell you who she is.
I'm Valda Joy Dean.
Started off a normal day, as I remember, like a lot of stuff going on television and radio about how extreme this flood was going to be. Seeing there hadn't been a lot of rain for as long as there was in the 1974 flood, I knew it could not be as bad. Being the flood guru of Rocklea, because we lived in the lowest spot near the creek, Rocky Waterholes Creek.
We're used to water across the bottom of the road, and people freak out when they see it, but that's the normal watercourse down at the bottom of Cambridge and Melbourne Street.
Policeman came in and said, what's your evacuation plan? What? Damn, but he said it was going to be worse than the 74 flood. So, a bit sceptical about that one.
Whenever there's a big thunderstorm or whatever, it always comes up there. But this time the water was going backwards. It wasn't going out to sea.
So as I was running down in my haste, she was running up, stroking this Karulpa. It was like, ah, rat! Get that rat at the house! Yuck! And she goes, Mum, the rat's more scared of you, because it just nestled into her as I was screaming. And that's when I thought, hang on, I've never seen a water rat near our property before. There's something going on. So I'm like, right, come with me. We walked to the end of the street and we just saw how the river was starting to overlap its banks. And I thought, it's pretty close now.
About midday, I phoned them back, and it was 2 metres at the top of the block, above the highest point of the block. So I thought, wow, I've got to try and move some stuff out. And then at this point, it was an absolute deluge that day. And a friend of mine, unannounced, showed up with a truck from work, and we started just... This is the hardest bit for me.
It is. You started moving.
Yeah, just started grabbing handfuls of shit and throwing it into any container and just throwing it into the back of this truck. And so that was the 10th. And by the night of the 10th, it was up to 6.8 metres prediction. So I realised
things weren't looking too good.
It was pretty average anyway. And I kept going back. We got a lot of stuff out because I had so much luck to know exactly what was going to happen before other people in my street who just were in disbelief. And I kept going back, and I started taking doors off their hinges so that, you know, they wouldn't get rooted. And we were there until sort of 8, 9 p.m. By that time it was chest deep. And this was all happening on the 11th. The flood didn't peak till the 13th.
When the water came up the street, the neighbours were still in a little bit of disbelief, but when they, by the end of the day, when they saw that we were really serious, I think they realised.
Oh, no, don't worry, Noel's saying. Everything will be quite all right. I said, probably come about 3 or 4 feet under the house, you know. But we'd done that before, and in 74 it was right over the roof. I went over our house, which is a high house with a tiled roof, in a boat in 1974. Right over the crest of the roof.
I had a knock on the door from the SES, and they were wearing their bright yellow jackets. And they said, look, we're evacuating this area, it's time for you to move. So I said, okay, how worried should I be? They, don't worry, the water might come through up to your ankles at the very most. And this is the advice I was given, up to my ankles. So then I halted running everything upstairs and just put a few things on top of chairs, on top of tables downstairs. Because I thought if this is what they know and this is what they're telling me, I'll act on that information. The other thing at the time in my head was how the Toowoomba floods had happened the day before, and how fast and rapid they were, and how people lost their lives, and how tragic that was. So for me, the priority was regroup the family, move to higher ground, and think about what to do next.
And a bloke came on the TV, and she said that the water was going to be worse than 74. And we started to look around and started to pack up.
So what sort of time did you start packing up?
Maybe 2ish in the afternoon, and we were out by 4.
And
there's not a lot of things you can get out of that house and in the back of a ute in 2 hours. Chris took pictures off the wall, all the computer stuff. We took a bag of clothes each, bag of shoes, a few instruments, forgot a few instruments, and we left. We put things up.
So
we didn't know.
And I had this beautiful 1962 Valiant Bluey Oak. I've been working on it for 4 years. My son-in-law said, why don't you whack that on a tilt tray and, it'll be right, it'll be right. But it wasn't right at all.
Yeah, I packed up the photos and a few
The cat.
clothes and the cat, naturally.
Shelley.
Yes. I left before
She was
him.
believing what was being said on television and radio. I didn't.
You might have listened to your
I had more brains.
When we were stacking things up as we were leaving, you kind of thought, probably won't get that high. You know, you're sort of optimistic, think, oh, I'll put this on top of that and that'll be right. But as it turned out, it probably did get up higher, but still not as high as what it could have been. In 1974, it went right over the roof.
You sit there and you go, oh my God, 4 children, where do we go? Who do we do it to?
Who are the lucky ones?
Who are the lucky winners? And we were really lucky. We had this fantastic friend up in Annerley, and she's got 3 boys who were out of town with her husband. So we knew there was a kiddie-friendly house, and she had an empty house. So that was Catherine Harmon.
At this time in our house, it was kind of waist deep inside the house, so probably 3 meters deep off the ground. And we canoed around in the house and got some stuff, the last few bits of shit, total irrelevant shit, but I just needed to do it. Just getting some shit off the top shelves and stuff, and then went and just got absolutely trashed that night.
We were relatively new to Brisbane. We'd only been in Brisbane 2 years prior to that. So we didn't really sort of understand how vulnerable we were.
It was really eerie that night in Catherine's because everything was quiet. And it was a clear sky with stars in it. You know, just clear, you know, moonlit sky. And you didn't know that there was water coming in through your home at the time, you know?
We all sort of thought, well, the floodwater comes in and it goes back down, you clean up your house and you move back in. I had no idea the devastation that this would cause and that, you know, eventually I'd have to be out of my home for nearly 10 months.
You need to evacuate your homes, you need to be prepared for the flood is coming. You know, so there was news updates the whole time on ABC radio. I rang the police originally to say, you know, I helped run the Yeronga outside schoolhouse care, and we were running vacation care during that time. And I thought, look, we can look after people's children, you know, it's what we do anyway. And when the police rang back and said, can you open an evacuation centre? Looking back on that, that was super naive of me to even go, yeah, okay, yeah, I can do that. It was just, I just wanted to do something. I didn't know what I could do, but I thought, okay, you know, surely this can't go on for very long, but now I know different, but I wouldn't change it. I would still say yes. First, I went to Coles at Fairfield and got some supplies, and I got back to the hall at the school and sort of put a table out with a few chairs. So I sort of went in the fate mode, thinking, okay, we'll, you know, feed these people and they'll just move on to their family. Everyone has family where you can go and sleep, don't you? So that's the naivety of me that, you know, thinks of, you know, that everybody's got somebody that they can turn to in an emergency. Jan arrived to pick up her son from vacation care, and she said, what are you doing? And I told her, and she said, well, you can't do this by yourself, you need someone here with you. So she stayed, and she stayed for probably the next couple of weeks. She didn't leave very much either. So she was, you know, instrumental in helping, you know, those first, at least the first week and a half that she was there. So at about 10 o'clock that night, I thought, you know, we need beds. Okay, so I rang my husband, and he bought all the sheets out of our linen cupboard, all the blankets. We contacted neighbours, we got sheets and blankets, and people started arriving, and they were sleeping just really on a blanket on the stage. We had a whole heap of people that were refugees that were living at a place at Oxley that the police had evacuated, and they were sleeping. They had small children, they had nothing. So at that stage I went, okay, if these people are going to sleep here, we need to find out where we get beds from. So we were listening to the radio, and the ABC radio was doing updates on, you know, what was happening. So I rang ABC radio and said, I'm running an evacuation centre at Yeronga. I need beds. I don't have anywhere for these people to sleep. I need mattresses, I need sheets, I need blankets. Anybody within this area that can help us, please just drop them off at Yeronga State School Hall. So within about an hour of that call going out, people started arriving with mattresses and blankets and sheets and futons and anything you could think of, blow-up air mattresses. And by 6 o'clock that next morning, we had 60 beds ready for people to sleep on, all made up with sheets and blankets, and it just looked like we were having a big sleepover.
We kayaked down the street and up the driveway because the water had just come down the driveway. So I remember kayaking onto my driveway.
And there was an old barge of a boat, dirty great fiberglass thing, parked that floated up high as the water went. And I found a board and I paddled myself down, tied it up to the back stairs and got inside.
We actually had to catch a boat in. We caught a boat from Crutchley Street. We're just looking at all this wall of water, and one of our neighbours turned up. He goes, look, I've got a tinny. Do you want to jump in the tinny with me? And I'm going over to Sharp Street, and you can see how high the water's come up. And it was just this bizarre feeling on this boat, and I'm touching the sign, the road sign that says Sharp Street as we went through. And we're up in the trees because the trees were so high, so we had to duck under the trees.
When I swam from about a kilometre away in, sat on the roof for a while, and I could see the water was going down by this time, and I could see the current slowly coming towards, and just this flotsam, and just shit everywhere, and there was, you know, yeah, all sorts of garbage all over the roof and stuff. So I started just tossing it off the roof and, you know, try and rake this oily sludge out off the roof so that it'd save a bit of cleanup later or whatever.
They took the boat up to the top level, and we still had a key. So obviously security. Good yes, girl. That's right. There's obviously couldn't get under below because the water was so high. But the tinny got to the top. There's a little landing, a porch. So he pulled up to the porch, and we stepped out and went through the front door.
But as you stepped in, you couldn't stand up. You had 3 points. You needed two feet and one hand just to balance, because if you stepped out at all, away went your foot.
Oh, it was totally surreal. You had this huge layer of brown all around you, a bit higher than the roof here. And after that, it took off to normal world.
The most amazing memory I've got of the flood, the high flood time, was you'd be swimming past a piece of debris, and it would just be, it was so silent that time, and you could hear like this amazing scuttling sound of insects, because any floating piece was covered in ants trying to find refuge.
And floating on this water tank were the native beehives. And I was just looking at them going, they've all drowned. So it was that was just the added sadness, you know, of the loss and devastation that had happened into our quirky little home.
Anyway, I swam back out and I reached my partner, got back in the car and then went away, and I found a little gecko in my ponytail that had sort of hitched a lift out of there. And then the water took about 3 days to recede again until it was back out the yard. So it was kind of like a 6-day flood for us.
The actual water was terrible. In 1974 there was mud and silt, but there wasn't the amount of filth and chemicals, because the area where we live, there's a lot more industry there, a lot more built up environment, and particularly we have at the bottom of our road 2 big sewer pits, and of course they all blew, and so it was thoroughly contaminated. There was sewage, oil, chemicals, and if you know the area beyond Yurongpili, that Rockley area, there's a lot of industry there, and afterwards we heard, you know, all the drums with battery fluids and oils, that was all in the water. It became pretty quickly that became evident, because I remember walking into the house as the water was going down and seeing our front door, and our front door was one of those herringboned silky oak ones, and over the years we'd marine varnished it quite a few times, and you wouldn't believe that the water level was so clearly marked on that door where the actual water had eaten into the varnish. It was sort of white, and above it was the clear varnish. So even the marine varnish wasn't able to survive the contaminated water.
The moment I walked around the back of the house after the flood, I thought I'd had a stroke and I was seeing in black and white, because it was just incredible, like an incredible oil slick in shades of grey.
So I was able to go back home and go up the side of the house and see the mud on the house and the mud everywhere there. You know, here it is again, after 74 one, going through all this stuff again, but there's nothing you can do about it, you just got to push on with it. It doesn't clean itself up.
It was just this gutty, eerie feeling as you walked all the way through it, you know, and just saw everything, all the kids' stuff, all the things you pick up over years, you know, they're baby books, they're this and that. That was that initial and total disbelief, I suppose, at that stage. And anything that was IKEA, chipboard was down, and she was mushy, and there was like this oily kind of a gungy, sticky thing through it as well. And it was just such a mess. Everything was upside down. And I thought, we'll go and we'll dig through it the next day. By the time I got there, everything was out in the street.
It was mayhem on one side of the street, but the other side, it was like a tourist strip.
In fact, there were so many and they kept coming and coming.
But not at all prepared for just this activity everywhere. It was just manic, crazy activity. That's what it felt like.
People were coming to help, and there was that many people you couldn't get down the street. You had to get your cars out of the way, and otherwise you'll leave them half a mile away and walk down.
You couldn't do it on your own. No. And I get that. You could not do this on your own. But it was really overwhelming sometimes. You know, initially it was really overwhelming to turn up and everything's there. Everything's on the street.
A couple of people whose parents had been around in '74, they were, you know, they'd come and say to me, there's a lot of stuff we can save here. And there was a wonderful woman who letter dropped in everyone's box saying, really think about what you're throwing out. A lot of this stuff can be saved.
We didn't understand how some things could maybe wash up.
Some of them thought anything with mud on it was disposable. And so it's all going out on the footpath where end loaders are going to come and load in a truck and take it away.
Volunteers and other people came around the house and helped you throw out things that you wanted to keep anyway.
And I'm picking up this flipping microphone that cost me $180 that was thrown out in the street. And I'm picking up my KitchenAid mixer, which I had splashed out on for our 10-year wedding anniversary, because if he can have a tool in the tool shed, ta-da.
You can have your KitchenAid.
I can surely have my KitchenAid. My friend took that, and her husband, he's a Sparky, he cleaned it up, and he, 6 months later, I came home. And it was working, good, it was lovely. But just things like that, everything was just stitched.
Did you want to say to them, stop?
Look, I think everybody tried to do things out of good intentions. Yes. So I don't ever want to sort of sound like I was ungrateful. No.
They were emptying out the drawers and tipping all out the windows down on the ground. When I went downstairs, here's Val's jewellery. Now, she's only got ordinary looking jewellery, like no really, they're not $5,000 pearls. Like they were a mother's, but I mean they weren't the real good stuff. And that's not all, like lots of things were tipped out. And I was a bit amazed. I said, hey, fellas, watch this.
They did collect things they wanted us to go through on the deck, but they didn't know what was important to you.
I guess having lots of people in your house and they'd say to you, what can I do? And I'd be like, I don't know, I've got no idea. You know, I was really grateful when Gav said to me, go into your room and sort out your clothes. See what you think you can save and what you can't save. And I could sort of then go into a little place and just come to terms with what had happened and what it all looked like and all this craziness around me. And that sort of helped. I kind of locked myself away a little bit where I didn't have to really deal with people too much. And then it was on my terms when I chose to come out. And I think they kind of went, well, maybe she's not coping too well, we'll just leave her by herself for a while. But that was good.
We had actually, with the help of family, it was a very clever move, I thought. We had piled all the breakables, all the crystal and all the crockery and that in the bathtub. So, and left the plug out so that it wouldn't float and wouldn't break. So the whole bathtub was full of all our treasured glassware and all the things that would normally have just been washed out of cupboards and smashed. A few days later, when all this green mould and stuff started to appear on the built-in wardrobes, things that I can't remember seeing in 1974. It was like some ugly, you know, black and green, gangrene almost, that was beginning to sprout on the walls. And then you realise that this house is contaminated.
The first week I could go back there and sort of kick bits of garbage and wipe my finger along the grime and stuff, but it wasn't really much sense in doing anything because it was, you know, knee-deep mud still. Yeah. And then it was definitely a case of not really knowing where to start or if it was worth it. You know, there was a lot of people saying, you know, bugger this, I'm, you know, getting a buyback and I'm out of here, and, you know, people just leaving or just not coming back at all. So there was, you know, a couple of weeks of what do we do? Because we'd only lived there sort of 6 months.
It was like a supermarket. We walked in and there was literally everything you needed sort of was there. And
the whole tuck shop was just totally cluttered with everything. You know, there were people making sandwiches and giving ready-to-eat food. There was takeaway stuff there that people could take home or take somewhere and cook it if they had somewhere to cook it.
How many people do you reckon?
Hundreds, absolutely hundreds.
One of the things that astounded me when I walked into the tuck shop was the age variation. There were 15-year-old teenagers making sandwiches, and then there was an 87-year-old man just standing at the sink washing up. So there was like, we'd got everything had just arrived in this tuck shop, and somehow out of it came this food. You know, like no one had job descriptions.
And what got us was just the volunteers going, you know, is there anything we can get you? Is there anything, like, that was so overwhelming. And it sort of took a lot off your shoulders as well. Like, suddenly you felt like, oh, okay, like, you're not by yourself sort of thing.
We stood there and watched the people just pouring in with a look of absolute total loss. And to be told, you can have this, you can take this, take some groceries home, do you need a meal, sit down, have something to eat. That was something really special.
When people came to the Yeronga Flood Recovery Centre in the early days, that was after the water had gone down. And I remember people saying, oh, I'm sorry, I'm covered in mud and I'm coming to eat. And we went, that's what we're here for. People soon realised that the centre was a safe place to come regardless of what you looked like, what you smelt like, or where you were from. If you were helping somebody clean up in their house or helping in the flood in some area, you were welcome to come and eat at the Yeronga Flood Recovery Centre. During that time, it actually took an effort to actually go, well, I can't actually go like this into a public place, where the Flood Recovery Centre was a safe place where they could just pull their car up out the front, get out, wash their hands, eat a meal, have something cold to drink because the weather was horrendously hot because it's Queensland in the middle of summer. They could have a bit of time to recover, you know, get a bit of energy back in their body to face the afternoon.
At the initial stage, the common elements within the people who were flood affected were that they were coming in and they were wanting to stay there, often to eat their meals. I think that was a commonality, to want to be part of a community.
Marion and Cass could just take some simple bag of pasta and something or other else and knock up some really nice, substantial sort of a meal out of it. Well, you did that? Magicians.
The first time I went up, really, we just went to try and access the services, government services, and that's when we found there was so much more going on at that centre. And I think we came away with a bag full of food and a bag full of toiletries and a couple of hugs, and there was somebody joking about alcohol up there, but I never did see it, no.
I remember we had a young, beautiful young couple come in, and they had two little beautiful girls. This man, his wife started crying because she was mortified. She was where she was at. This chap was doing his accountant's degree, you know, he was a well-educated, proud man, and here he was with his girls, his precious girls, and they didn't have any undies. And he had to walk up and say to someone, I need undies. And then you got on to questions like, what size do you need? And you, as a volunteer, you were skipping a lot of hello, get to know you games. You were going, what's your bra size? I think we were very lucky with the volunteers we had. They were genuinely respectful of that information because it was extremely personal as well.
I was very affected when women had come in heavily pregnant, or there was a few women who had just given birth. I felt really I felt quite impacted by those women because I used to think, oh my God, it's hard enough when you're doing that in a very dry home with lots of family support and all of your stuff that you had ready, trying to breastfeed and all of that. And I used to think, wow, how do they get through it? But they do. So I think it really reinforced that human spirit, I think. I really do believe people were volunteering because they needed to volunteer. I do believe people were coming in there as well as to help people. It was fulfilling our own needs. I really do believe that. In doing that, it had a really positive impact on others.
I wanted to help once my kids got back to school. I wanted to help, and it was just by chance that I'd run into that friend. So I already felt like I could connect in some way. My friend, I liked what she was doing because she had several milk crates set up with post-it notes on each milk crate with people's names and a list of what they had asked for. So it was things like toothbrushes, tissues, those really little things that I guess you don't think about. You just expect to always be there. So I liked the idea that she'd gone door knocking to find out exactly what people wanted, and then she would go back and deliver those things to them.
I was given some advice by a very wise person. Her name is Di. She works for the Department of Communities in the ACT. And she said to me very early on in the piece, I need to sit down with you and talk to you. And I thought I was in trouble, or I don't know, government official. Naughty schoolgirl, there's always the naughty schoolgirl. And she said, you don't need to be everything to everybody. You need to pick the things that people aren't doing and do them really well. So she said, don't do clothes, don't do things that you can send people out to, St Vinny's or Lifeline. Let those groups take care of what they do well. Just know where those people are.
About 5 weeks after the flood, I'd finally stopped working for a day, and my partner and I drove down Fairfield Road from Dutton Park, and it was the first time that I'd realised how far the waters had travelled through Fairfield, through Yeronga and Sherwood, Rockley and so forth. And I suppose it was a shock to me. It was very graphic. There was mud everywhere. There was a lot of work to do. I remember going past Rockley markets and seeing a pallet probably 10 metres in the air and not believing that that could have possibly floated to that place.
You're sweating away and you're hot and you're working away there, and they just come around with a cold drink.
Heaven.
It's wonderful, yeah.
The outreach and the care, which really makes me touched by the role and the work of the Yeronga Flood Recovery Centre, because we'd take the time to find out, okay, what exactly do you want? You know, what would make you happy in the short term to be able to get through to the long term? So be it Italian books, or be it a sewing machine, or be it, you know, a new muffin tray or whatever. And that was fantastic, really amazing.
I wasn't putting any demands on them with names, addresses, insurance status, anything like that. That was not my agenda. It was, what is your core need? And they were happy to engage. I think at that very early stage, the light bulb went on, don't prejudge what they need. That happened when I was asking a couple, it was the husband, I said, what would you like? What do you need? And he said, I need piano music. I'm thinking, yep, you're just going to be sitting there tickling the ivories. But his wife was a piano teacher. She'd lost her piano and she wanted music and non-fiction texts. Now, I could have given her as much shampoo and conditioner as she wanted, but she didn't really give a toss about that. She wanted what she'd lost. So there was a specific need for everyone and an individual need, and I think that's one of the things the centre did really well, was they didn't do a mass blanket of these are your needs, but the individual care allowed them to be respected as individuals, as families, as whatever format their family took. And that wasn't a given. It gave them, I think, respect.
You drop off and people go back to normal life, but they still had this place they could go to and feel cared for and were looked after.
The first 6 months particularly, when all this uncertainty surrounds you, I mean, where do you go? And to be able to be somewhere where people are welcoming and nurture you a little bit, and not only that, but also feed you in the process.
You did love a good feed.
And importantly, have all information available, you know, where you can go, so you're not just going around in circles.
We had this wonderful woman called Rita, and she volunteered her imagination and her time, and she's still doing it. And she'd come in and she'd distract the little ones, and she'd create activities for them, and we could sit back and just maybe have a cup of tea and just talk and, you know, be moms. But we could discuss any of our own issues that we were dealing with at the time, and maybe touch base and discuss some of our older kids and any other problems that we might have. It was a fantastic place to be able to just go to.
Melinda and I pushed the barrow fairly severely that we wanted to make it a one-stop shop and wanted to make it easier for them. So we probably rather arrogantly said services had to come to these people, because people had done enough to actually get there, to think they could go out in public, they could drive, they could come, accept charity. You know, we're a proud nation, and so you had people that had never ever had to take, and they had to take to survive. So then the Department of Communities came once a week or twice a week, but then they started different people from DOCS coming, and we said, no, don't do that. You are making these people tell their story again and again, and it was re-traumatising them. They were still living and breathing it. So having someone sit down and say, and where do you live, and how flooded, and do you have, they didn't. It was awful for them. And so then we had a win situation. We got an absolutely cracking worker, and Sarah was the main worker we had, and she was fabulous because then people felt safe. So it was all that relationship building.
There was a lot of care and sensitive treatment needed of people who had just gone through a natural disaster and who were really often coming into contact with services and systems that had never been part of their experience in the past, and getting those people sensitive, consistent support was one of the hallmarks of the work of Melinda and Fiona during that period.
I remember coming down to you that time when Orla had thrown, it was the hardest thing. When I had to get the teacher to take her off of me in the classroom. She was 7. And she just didn't, she wanted me to stay, and I had Finn hanging off of me, and I didn't know where to turn to. I didn't know what to do next. And that's when we were able to access the psychologist. We knew that if I went to that centre, there was somebody who would understand where we were coming from. And that was huge. And it was always with open arms that you were met. And your heart was fuller for going in there too. Filling up the cup again and re-inspiring you to just put one foot in front of the other again and just get on with it.
The role of local community centres was really highlighted through this disaster as a way of local people helping each other. And local community centres had to be fairly flexible and light on their feet and start running a whole range of things like outreach programs and so forth.
Did the centre give me a sense of support? Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that's what I mean by solace and refuge, because sometimes I just wanted to totally just get away, just get away from Rockley, get away from the house, get away from this reality of having to rebuild the house and the what ifs and blah, blah, blah. And so I used to head down to the centre and just have a chat and a cuddle and a feed, and it just felt great.
No, well, I adopted the cupboard up there, the rubbish cupboard, and called it my office up there. And Fiona or someone got this little plaque, which I still have at home, Selwyn's office. So I'm looking for a toilet now to hang that on somewhere.
Selwyn, so you were a floodie and then you started being a volunteer. Did you enjoy that change of role?
No, I continued as both. Still doing things at home. Well, things still need to be done. Yeah, I think it was good to get involved and help out some of the people, yeah. I think that was better, actually getting involved and rather than just coming in and getting the things then disappearing again.
I think the fact that it was allowed to move to the preschool and stay there as long as it was, it did allow you to try and give back to other floodies.
So we went to the house every day, did some more sorting and cleaning and despairing, and then come lunchtime we'd go back to the community centre for a bit of support and some lovely food and just talking to people. And that became part of a ritual with us that we sort of looked forward to. Okay, we weren't just sitting all day in the house doing these terrible things. We had somewhere where we could go. And I remember not feeling well one time, and I could even lie down for a little while. So that was good. And when the centre then moved to the preschool in the park, that was even better because they had more room. And all these wonderful volunteers kept urging us, to come back every day. So we did that. And, that was a kind of like a saving grace for a while, because you can only talk so much about your problems to your family and people that haven't been flooded, but to be able to come back to the centre and find people there that totally understood what you were going through and share the stories with them and listen to their experiences and learn from it too, because you're novices when you're dealing with insurance and rebuilding and costs of repairs, and so that was really a great help. And I always said that, it didn't matter how often you repeated your story there, everybody was always interested because you could tell it every day and people were still interested.
For the 18 months that it took me to rebuild the house, it was there were times that were rather full on, so I wanted to go and sort of go like that and have a nice hug and have a nice meal and get a carton of shampoo and conditioner.
And also, very importantly, it was a centre where you could get a lot of information. You didn't have to go and find out and run around all different places to see if there was anything you could be eligible for. All the information was there. And in fact, it was only by going there that we met some people from various departments that used to come in regularly at the community centre and virtually urged us, even though we felt we weren't really entitled or eligible, but they virtually urged us to go and apply for some of these things. And thank goodness we did, because we became eligible for some help, which was a great assistance.
Community centres were responding to this local disaster all over Brisbane. We were working together and networking with each other to talk about our experiences, to share resources, share information, and to realise that we were all doing it tough. We were having to really stretch our own resources and be light on our feet in order to respond to the very strong level of demand there was from people across the inner south of Brisbane for support.
Come the end of May, Fiona and I sort of went, okay, if we're expected to do this, Department of Communities was saying, you can't close, it's still too early to close. And we're sort of going, we can't keep doing this and you want us to run a professional centre and run it, you know, in a way that it's supporting all the services that were accessing us, something has to give.
It was amazing what had happened in the recovery centre, like what links had created, and after a while we started relying on each other, and then when their place wasn't going to be anywhere, like it was pretty sort of devastating, and it did leave an empty hole in the place.
The magnificent volunteer effort that we were seeing at Yeronga couldn't just continue forever, that people needed to get back to their own lives and to have a livelihood. And that was a strong message that started to come out from the recovery centre, that unless there was some form of support that was offered or provided through government, that they would have to think about closing the doors. And that was the very last thing that they wanted to do. The needs were still extremely strong, and there was a lot of heart and passion going into trying to meet them. So after working with all of the centres, including Yeronga, around our resource needs, we took the opportunity to seek a meeting with our local member, who at the time was the Premier, to put a case and say all of these centres need additional support. And I suppose what particularly struck me at that time was that whilst centres all over southern Brisbane were struggling and seeking extra support and extra resources to meet the needs, the Yeronga Recovery Centre in fact had no government support or resources at that time, and that in fact the Yeronga Centre had arisen as a local organic initiative from local people wanting to support each other and contribute to each other's recovery.
West End Community House, they auspiced us, which was a very big ask for the board and for their community to auspice something of these two unknown women that were from somewhere else.
There was an active discussion at West End Community House about flood recovery, and so the Yeronga Recovery Centre became part of that discussion. And the question for us was how could we support the Recovery Centre to continue to operate, and what that would look like for us. One thing that was obvious to us, that there was an incredible amount of social capital being generated at the Yeronga Recovery Centre, and that included volunteerism, donations, in-kind support, many, many things. So the West End Community House Board of Management, in understanding that the centre was there and organic and had literally grown from community needs and a local community response, decided it would be prepared to try to provide some framework for that centre to operate into the future.
With the recovery, I noticed it was a waiting game. You really had to wait for people to come and see you, to do all the things, to investigate like your flooding, to check out your insurance.
For a long time, we didn't know what would happen, like so many people, and that was the difference between 1974 and this time. That instead of just going back and getting on with the cleanup, like so many people, because of the insurance complication, we just didn't know what's going to happen to the house. Will it be repaired? Will it have to be demolished? Will the insurance accept a repair? I mean, and that took from January till September before that was even resolved.
We had a very long, drawn-out sort of situation with our insurance company. So, until work started between early February and I think work started in July, they were probably some of the toughest months that I've been through as a parent, definitely. But it took all my resolve and all my strength to get through those first 6 months. And I often used to say to Gav, I don't know how people who can't argue their case in a persuasive manner, I don't know how they cope, really. And we were two people, so we could share that burden. Yes.
In your capacity, you're not threatened by the documentation, which a lot of people were, because it was formidable what people were asked to do. And there were some things that were so wrong that it had to be comical, when people were saying, get on the internet and do this, and and people are going, well, I don't actually have a house. You know, that means I don't actually have electricity, and you're saying, do this and we'll post that to your mailbox. Well, could you actually process, I don't have a mailbox? You know, it's actually floated away, or all these things. And I think the wear and tear on people of the intellectual demands was really hard, because you were literally trying to keep your heads above water with, we're getting 2 kids to school and daycare, we're trying to get meals. It was survival instinct.
We went to one house where the people were so cold in their house, they'd pitched a tent in the lounge room and they were sleeping in the tent inside the house because the linings had gone off the walls, and you know, people went through hell. They really did.
Well, we knew for sure once it cleaned out, there was so much damage. Everything was trashed. There was absolutely no way it could be put back together again.
So instead of a retirement village, we were doing what most young couples do, build a new home. And of course we had to build it at the stage in our life where you don't expect to deal with all the issues that come from building a home. So yes, it was a challenge. It was a bit of a shock in a way, because when you've lived in one house for 42 years, I mean, we bought this house just before we got married, and we invested a lot of our life in it, you know, repeatedly renovated and extended it, and then to see it demolished like that. But, you know, I still have a bit of homesickness for it.
So we actually thought, okay, let's take advantage of this. Let's rebuild with materials that if it floods again, we'll be fine. So we've rebuilt with builder's block, we've rebuilt with aluminium, we've rebuilt with concrete. We've completely rebuilt things. So if it does flood, we can just go in and hose it out, and 2 or 3 days later we'll move back in. That's why we took so long to rebuild. It actually took us a while to find builders and architects who would build the way we wanted. And we spent a long time fighting with insurance, because they're like, build back the way it was. And we're like, we don't want to build back the way it was. We saw what happened to the way it was. We're completely inundated, and we had to live out of home for a year. We don't want that to happen again. It was too disruptive. We actually moved 7 times that year. Just trying to get a long-term lease in West End was challenging. People putting up the prices because there was more demand on places to live. And we felt very strongly in our belief we did not want to do that again.
So I had a lady called Daisy turn up. She looks at me and goes, "You going up to the Flood Recovery Centre today?" And I went, "Nah, I've got no need to go up there today." And she's like, "I'm going to go up there." And I said, "All right, well, I'll come up with you, you know, and help you pick some things out and stuff." I remember you must have overheard us talking about a gardening group.
Mrs. Jessup.
And I remember, like, it was like a 5-minute conversation we had with these people that I hardly even knew. And, you know, and I said to Kate, well, like, I wouldn't mind doing some weeding. And then I heard Fiona behind me go, "So, are we going to start a gardening group, girls?" And I'm like, where's this lady come from? And, you know, and then for the rest of it, I saw you in that orange, you know, like...
high-vis workwear.
Your formal wear. I think Kate went home that night, created a Facebook page and an email address, and she sent me an email saying, "I've made you an administrator of my Facebook page and of this email, and let's go start gardening," you know, like, and before we knew it, like, we've created this little sort of idea into this massive sort of recovery help. And what I was learning out there would ultimately help me with my recovery at home.
At first, people were more focused on their homes than their gardens, but there was a sense of urgency to help save the gardens. Lapsing time was dangerous. The mud turned hard like cement, suffocating the plants, and rain in February brought on plant rot. The initial garden recovery group consisted of Helen, myself, our husbands and children.
What really helped me heal and reconnect with where I was living was primarily through the garden, and putting that spade in the ground, digging it out, making a hole, putting plants in, nurturing them. That for me was so rejuvenating I thought I'm really pleased to be actively back involved in my garden, and that for me was healing. So I then went, okay, my children aren't going to miss out on this either. So we got pots which we painted and planted some plants, and just being actively involved was so important.
And I did feel that in many gardens, that once we got in there and started it, like they were able to go into that corner and start in that corner and work their way out, you know, and that was very important.
Got new chickens, native bees are up and running. We've planted a lot of new trees. In fact, the Garden Recovery Centre, they're probably the group that I've spent the most time with in communicating, because for me my garden was fantastic.
Once you walk past that gate and into someone's yard, you're really into someone's heart. And with the Garden Recovery, I just felt that we were connecting in a different way. At first it was just weeding, and then I realised that we were actually like a mental health sort of, you know, monitor, like where people would, we'd watch people grow, you know, and if they weren't growing, we were able to sort of say to someone, look, you know, like we're a bit concerned about them. And like I felt that it gave me some sort of, I don't know, that I wasn't suffering, you know, like it was a combination of a healing process.
The one thing that she did, as old as she was, the one thing that she did was made her way down the stairs. It was a high-set house at the back. And she would go to that garden and she'd poke around with her stick and she'd pull the weeds out and she'd water it. And he said, I'd hate to think that with that not there, you know, what's she going to do? Will she make her way down to the garden, you know, to the yard at all if she hasn't got that garden to tend? So, yeah, that was really nice to do that. And she came down and thanked us and everything, and she said, I probably won't be here for long anyway, but it's made me happy today. So, yeah, it was really nice.
I remember very fondly how grateful people were when we transformed their garden, seeing smiles on faces, knowing this was a turning point for some, and realising that, with time, things would be better. We would not have been there if it wasn't for Lions, basically. In that first 6 months, they put money where their mouth was. Now, that was not due to any association. They did not know us at all. And Bev and Winston came up to the Flood Recovery Centre when it was at the tuck shop, and they lived their motto, let's serve, and they did. And I think that is an amazing thing for people to put money where the government money should have been and keep us afloat.
My name's Winston Fraser. I'm from the Lions Club organisation, and our role was to look after the people. Well, we ended up looking after roughly 400 families with electrical goods, white goods, hot water systems, basically whatever they needed to get back into their homes. And at this point in time, we're down to one house. We decided that we needed to have stuff on hand to give away, so our car sat outside for 6 months and our garage became a shopping centre. And in a lot of the cases we got the people to come over to us because they'd told us on the phone they didn't need very much. And they just walked into the garage and there was a jug, a toaster, you know, a microwave oven, pots and pans, everything that got thrown out of the house. And it was just initially that sort of stuff to start them off.
We found out it was Bev and Winston that we came across. And within moments they said, look, we've heard about the work that you've been doing, we really want to support you. And I didn't even know who they were or where they were coming from, but they said, look, we'd like to take you guys shopping and get you some tools and get you some equipment, pots, plants, and help you continue on. And that was sort of the initial light that started our whole journey, because once we got that first donation, like they ended up taking Kate to Bunnings. I remember seeing that photo with Kate and all this equipment and, you know, all these bags of dirt, and I thought, oh my gosh, we can do so much with that stuff.
We bought about 150 refrigerators, about 150 washing machines, a lot of hot water systems, a huge amount of bedding, furniture. I mean, we turned the stock over in our garage, I think 6 or 8 times. Just the look on people's faces when we turned up with a delivery truck and a fridge and a washing machine and something else on the back of it and said, here you are, take it, it's yours. The look on their faces was enough.
People didn't believe that it was free, did they?
No. No, they didn't. And they just said, you know, where's the money coming from? And I said, well, it's coming from the people all over Australia.
When Bev and Winston offered me a fridge and a washing machine, I suddenly felt like a floodie. I was like, oh my God, you know. And it also gave me that hope. You know, as soon as I was like, these people are buying white goods, like this is expensive, you know, this is, you know, and I was thinking, no, I'm right, you know, there's other people that, you know, need help. And they're like, no, we've been to those people, Helen, it's 6 months on, you know, and that when they offered me that, you know, like I was like, this is amazing. And it also gave me that drive to keep going in what I was doing, that, you know, other people believed what we were doing, you know, and our community effort was working.
What would you say for the community when affected by a natural disaster? It's important to
do whatever you can to help the people in need.
I'm proud to be a Lion because
I'm able to serve people that are less fortunate than myself.
56 years of serving those less fortunate with selfless reasons. I mean, you don't do it for praise. I mean, the Lions was very sadly not recognised during the floods as it should have been for an organisation that distributed how many millions of...
I think about 4 million altogether. As far as Lions is concerned, every dollar raised goes back to the people. And that's one of the reasons why when we go out in the street with a bucket, people are more than happy to put money in the tin because they know where it's going and who's got hold of it.
Marvellous job with this building that they've got here. The building is only a building, but it's what they've done with the people as well.
It's like a house and it's like a home. You walk in here and you almost get a big hug.
The renovation of 4 Killarney Street, I remember walking in through the gates down the side on the very first day. It was sort of almost a momentous occasion that when we put the key in the door and opened it up and we saw there was graffiti on every single wall that was on in the building. But it was exciting to know that there was a place that Yeronga Community Centre was going to be able to make a home.
So from the disaster, the opportunity was there to build something lasting, and that was the Yeronga Community Centre.
How do we make something that was so bad into something that we thought was safe? But like Yeronga did during the floods, people came out of the woodwork, and people that had never painted before painted, people that had never held a nail gun before held a nail gun, and it was just a real testament to the community.
I mean, we got to meet the Queen, which was, it was exciting in, you know, it was like Cinderella. There was gold envelopes and stamps and all that. And it was funny because the floodies were beside themselves. So it was like their little girls were going off and they were, you know, what are you going to wear? And you're thinking, yeah, that's good. And it was a delightful honour to meet her. But the fact was when we got in there and we were all in wee groups, and Melinda and I had been placed in a group, and there were the grandparents that were hoisted from the roof in the Lockyer Valley. There were people that their entire house had just gone. And you feel this big, because every single night that Melinda and I went home, we could make a choice. Can I turn my light on? Can I get my kids' photo out? Can I ring my mum? We could do all that. But, you know, this woman, her grandchild no longer has a fear of water. Like, we didn't have any of that. And that's when you think, we were so little. We were so little because these people that were flooded did it every day. And we didn't have to do that. We got stories, we got laughter, we got hugs, we fed bellies, we listened. But every night I could go home and hug those boys, and I knew we were together, and some of those families were falling apart. So when you got the award, you did sort of want to go, and what about the rest of them? Because we weren't individuals. I mean, Melinda and I were two people that we work really well as a team, and for whatever reasons we were put together as a team. But, you know, Jesus needed followers, and CWAs need more than one pot of tea, so we were lucky. So, yes, we got recognition, but we got a gift from them.
My life will never be the same because I feel that I have lost some of the energy that I had before the flood, and I can't recapture it, not yet anyway.
Working on it though, aren't you, Princess?
Work in progress.
Work in progress.
If it wasn't for the Wahroonga Flood Recovery Centre, I think Norm and I have often said, I sometimes think we probably would have just said, oh, this is all too hard. And we would have maybe just said, look, take the money and run. I'm not sure, but that's the sort of feeling you get when you're overwhelmed, isn't it? When
the helplessness.
Yes, yes.
That loss of security was very difficult. So I found hope, I guess, in sort of looking back now and saying, okay, I'm pretty confident having got through that, I could probably get through most things that life is going to chuck at me. So that gives me hope.
Oh, I found hope in knowing that we were surrounded by people that understood.
Oh, I found hope in the companionship and awareness of a lot of the other people.
I found hope in community. I found hope in strangers, and I found hope just about everywhere I looked after that flood. The whole, community of Brisbane were amazing.
People that you never really knew showed you a good side, and I think that's one of the big things out of a disaster. It really brings out the humanity side of people.
It's just that you do feel, I guess, more embedded in a community when you see how that community reached out to you and those people.
Oh, okay. When affected by a natural disaster, it's important not to go to pieces, to realise that these things do happen, that you're one of people that can happen to. You just have to go through it and come out the other side.
All I could say is get your thinking right. I think the mental thing is far more important than the rest of it, like an attitude. We were blessed to an extent because I'm pretty handy, so we're probably a bit more fortunate than some. As for losing hope, never, never, never. Two men looked out from prison bars. One saw mud, the other stars.
And you chose to see stars.
Yeah, well, it's either that or, you're hassled to the extent where it's too hard, It's not that way at all. We're very fortunate. Valda, like to digress, she's, 81 years old. Today, she drove 83 kilometres in our car to play bingo. There and back.
And I won $60.
You go, girl.
I found hope in the care that I perceived from my fellow human beings after the flood. For example, there was a guy on the 14th of January, there's a guy driving around with a tray full of pets in the back of his ute, just handing out beers. Never seen him before again. And there was a disabled woman who got her son to drive her down the street and gave me a $100 IKEA voucher. And just the level of humanity in the people that I had sort of doubted that in the past.
When I walked into the kitchen, where all these people were washing all my dishes and my pots and everything else, and I had a few little tears because I thought how wonderful they were.
The community must conduct its own recovery process because it's more personal, personable, effective.
When affected by a natural disaster, it's important to
reach out, ask for help.
When affected by a natural disaster, it's important to have a portable radio.
Good survival technique, my love. When affected by a natural disaster, it's important to
listen to the ABC, get information coming in to you, so you can be a little bit more proactive than reactive.
When affected by a natural disaster, it's important that the community rallies and that people support one another and are not too ashamed to accept that support.
Any decisions that are made about how the response is going to be and how to help people to recover, that there really needs to be at the grassroots level where people who are either affected or who are directly involved in helping people are in there making decisions on how to respond or how to access.
The community must direct its own recovery process because it's only a local community that knows the needs of the people that live there. I mean, needs vary from community to community.
You need people who can go direct to the site and understand what the needs are. It needs to be in the heart of where the disaster is. There's no point in it being 20 minutes away or half an hour away. It's too hard to travel so far.
I'm proud of my community because there's pretty stoic sort of spirit around, and everyone's had their dramas after the flood and stuff. But yeah, it's a pretty ballsy little suburb, Rockley, and pretty no frills and sort of greasy overalls type suburb. But rolled its sleeves up and got the job done, and no, it's good bread and butter.
A lot of my life I've been searching for a living environment where I found community, and I've never really been able to find it. And we've got it in that street. It's not huge, but there's a really nice network of people there, and I'm not ready to let that go just at this. I do think it's kind of important to stay, and that probably makes no sense at all, but if I did have to leave, I feel like I was betraying people now. I've given up on the street, and I don't want to give up on it because I think it's a great place and we've got some really good friends there.
Well, I'm proud of my community because the people that live there show that they're willing to help each other, and I know in my own neighbourhood people do.
When I think about my community, I immediately think of Sharp Street and my friends around the tree, and then I think of it in a wider connection through the West End State School and Yeronga. And the amount of support and love and loyalty that followed that flood was quite something.
I'm proud of my community centre because it's a place of love where people have come here and they've been inspired, and I think it's a really good example of something that's essential in every parts of the world, where people of good hearts can put these things together out of their own initiative, rather than because the government has dictated that we need a such and such in here and we'll have a plan for this, and we will have duty statements for these people and whatever. But this place was put together by people who didn't have documentation that's needed for, well, some people think is needed for this. So this is a place of love rather than a place of bureaucracy.
We also made the point that that centre had attracted a hell of a lot of social capital and had shown the willingness of Yeronga community members to get in and help each other. And in fact, that was a very excellent example of what a community centre can do, particularly in the toughest times, such as going through natural disasters.
And even now, just seeing the diversity of, you know, everyone that comes through, that, you know, comes here to feel comfortable and to be themselves, and it feels like that same vibe that we all created, you know, back at that recovery centre. And honestly, there's no way that I would have visited 500 gardens if I didn't have that recovery centre to have supported me. There's no way I would have done it. So I thank you for that, because I think this is going to be, if we can hold on to it, you know, this is going to be a spiritual place for a long time, you know.
We hope to lift spirits, that's for sure.
Yeah.
We hope to drink a few as well. Love.
Yeah, I think so. Must be time.
I'll sing you my happy song, we'll sing la 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 la. Oh, it don't matter, no, no, no. Oh, it don't matter, no, no, no. Hey, hey, it's a beautiful day, and beautiful things can be coming your way. So la 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 la. Oh, it don't matter, let it all go if it's feeling wrong. If you need a hug, I'll be right along, singing la 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 la. Oh, it don't matter, no, no, no. Oh, it don't matter, no, 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 no. Well, they say love, 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 it makes the world go round. I said a big, big hug, it works too, I found. We're all looking for a little peace on earth, man. We're all looking for that little piece of turf. There are good times and not, man, it's just the way. There's no need to fill your heart with hate. The greedy and the grumpy, they just don't belong. So maybe we should sing them a la-la song. Let's sing la-la-la-la. Oh, it don't matter, sing la-la-la-la-la. Oh, it don't matter, singing la-la-la-la-la. Oh, it don't matter, singing la-la-la-la-la. Oh, it don't matter, sing la-la-la-la-la. Oh, it don't matter, singing la-la-la-la-la. Oh, it don't matter, singing la-la-la-la-la. Oh, it don't matter, singing la-la-la-la-la. Oh, it don't matter, no,